Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
There's something deeply unsettling about a place that never closes. A 24-hour Burger King in the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio, became the subject of a quietly whispered urban legend, one rooted in fact and darker than most dared to believe. It started with the graveyard shift. Most of the crew at this location didn't last long past a week. The turnover was insane, and not just your average teenagers being flaky kind of thing. There were stories, whispers from former employees that something wasn't right after 2 a.m. A few of them mentioned hearing the fryer bubble when it wasn't on, or the soft ding of the counter bell even when the lobby was locked tight. Some even swore they saw a figure walking through the dining area after hours, always just out of the corner of their eye, always gone by the time they turned. Brandon was 19 when he took the job. He didn't believe in ghosts or any of that. He just wanted the overnight shift because it paid slightly more. His first few nights were uneventful, quiet, cold, boring. But by the end of the first week, weird things began creeping in. Around 3:14 a.m. every night, the drive-through headset would crackle to life, even when no cars were visible in the lot. There was never a voice, just static, and then a low, wet breathing sound, like someone was standing far too close to the mic. The first time it happened, Brandon thought it was interference. The second time, he pulled off the headset and checked the security monitor. No cars, no movement, but the static kept going until he physically unplugged the unit from the wall. One night, he went to clean the men's bathroom and found something scrawled on the mirror in ketchup, or at least he hoped it was ketchup. It read, "Don't let it in." The doors were locked, the alarm system armed. No one should have been able to get inside without him hearing it. The camera facing the bathroom hallway had gone completely black from 3:13 to 3:16 a.m. Those same 3 minutes he'd been mopping the kitchen and heard a soft knocking coming from the walk-in freezer. He laughed it off, trying to push down the growing knot in his stomach. But the knocking happened again the next night, louder this time. When he opened the freezer, there was nothing there, except a single paper Burger King crown sitting on the shelf, folded and soggy from the moisture in the air. He hadn't seen those crowns in years. They hadn't stocked them in that store since 2019. One night, Brandon was the only one on shift when the register screen blinked and rebooted itself. Then it processed a transaction, 666 cents for a Whopper meal. No cheese, no onions. No one was at the counter. No one was on the drive-thru. And yet, the receipt printed, fresh and warm. On it was a name, King. The screen froze, then flickered. Security cameras went out, every one of them. Then the dining room lights began to dim, one by one, until the whole place glowed with that off-orange hue that made everything look slightly wrong. Brandon swore he heard the soft jingle of a bell, like the kind they used to have on the door in the 90s. And when he turned, a silhouette was standing at the entrance of the dining area. It was tall, too tall, dressed in what looked like an oversized paper crown and a stained Burger King uniform from a decade ago. Its face didn't move, no expression, just two wide, wet eyes and a fixed grin that looked almost drawn on. It didn't speak, it just pointed, not at Brandon, but toward the kitchen. And then it walked backwards, step by step, into the shadows of the dining room until it was gone. Brandon ran, quit that night, never went back. The store tried hiring new overnight staff, but after one too many shifts, ended with someone calling in terrified, quitting by text, or just vanishing without clocking out. They shut the place down from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. Corporate didn't like it, but no one could explain the data. Dozens of unexplained register pings, unscheduled equipment failures, and camera outages always at the same time, 3:14 a.m. Local rumor has it that the Burger King was built on the remains of an old diner that burned down in 1973. 3 people died, one of them a night cook who refused to leave his station even as the flames spread. His body was never recovered. The foundation was leveled. No one thought twice about rebuilding on top of it. But sometimes, after midnight, when you're driving down that stretch of highway, if you slow down near that particular Burger King, you might see a dim figure standing just beyond the front counter, not moving, just waiting. And the scariest part, he's wearing a crown.
Story number 2.
Late one autumn evening in a quiet town in Wisconsin, a man named Carl drove to a small, almost forgotten fast food joint called Tasty Burgers. It was tucked away on a dark corner of an aging highway, the kind of place that locals rarely visited but still existed in the town's memories. The establishment had been there for decades, but it looked like it hadn't seen much care in recent years. Carl had been driving for hours, trying to get home after a long week of work, and the thought of a hot meal and a quiet moment to himself seemed like the perfect end to his stressful day. He'd passed by this place hundreds of times, but never stopped. Something about it always seemed off. But tonight, he was too tired to care. The flickering sign caught his attention, and he decided to pull in. As he walked through the door, he noticed how quiet the place was. Not a single customer, despite the smell of sizzling beef and fries wafting through the air. The lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the faded red and yellow interior. There was a single worker behind the counter, an older man with thick glasses and a tired face. "Can I help you, sir?" the worker asked, his voice raspy. Carl nodded, ordering the usual, a double cheeseburger, fries, and a soda. The man behind the counter didn't write anything down but turned to the grill, flipping a patty with expert ease. Carl found a booth near the window, waiting. He glanced at the menu board above the counter. It hadn't been updated in years. The prices were out of date, the pictures blurry and faded. As he sat there, something felt wrong. He couldn't put his finger on it. The air was heavy, almost thick with an unpleasantly sweet odor, and he noticed that the place seemed too still. No background noise, no sound of the deep fryer or the hum of the fridge, just the sizzling of the meat and the occasional clink of utensils. His meal came, placed on the counter with a soft thud. Carl took it back to his booth and started eating, trying to shake the unease creeping up his spine. The burger tasted fine, though the fries were a little soggy. He wasn't sure why he was still so unsettled, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As he chewed, Carl's gaze drifted to the far end of the restaurant. There, in the corner booth by the window, sat a man in a black suit. The man was staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes. His skin was unnaturally pale, his face almost gaunt, as if he hadn't eaten in weeks. His lips were cracked and dry, and there was something about the way he was sitting, so still, so rigid, that sent a cold shiver down Carl's back. Carl tried to look away, but the man didn't move. He just stared, his eyes never leaving Carl's face. After a few moments, Carl's stomach churned, the unease turning to something darker. He couldn't help himself. He had to know what was going on. He stood up slowly and walked toward the man's booth. As he got closer, the air grew colder, and the sweet, overpowering smell grew stronger. When he was just a few feet away, he stopped. The man hadn't blinked once. Carl took a step back, suddenly feeling sick. "Are you okay?" Carl managed, his voice shaking. The man's lips parted, but what came out wasn't words. It was a low, raspy growl, a sound that didn't belong to any human. The man's face twisted into a grotesque grin, and Carl froze in horror as his eyes filled with a strange, dark gleam. Without another word, the man's hands reached out from the booth, long and skeletal, and gripped Carl's wrist with terrifying strength. Carl tried to pull away, but the grip tightened, and then the man shifted. His form became blurry, like a bad television signal. And in a heartbeat, Carl was yanked forward, almost thrown into the booth beside him. The cold smell was overwhelming now, and Carl's vision blurred as he struggled to understand what was happening. The walls of the restaurant seemed to stretch and warp, the fluorescent lights flickering wildly. The man was still there, his smile widening into a grotesque, impossible shape, his eyes glowing with an eerie light. Before Carl could scream, the world around him suddenly snapped back into place, like a rubber band being released. He was sitting in the booth again, the burger still half-eaten in front of him. But the man in the black suit was gone. Shaken, Carl rushed to the counter, but the worker was still there, wiping down the counter as if nothing had happened. His tired face didn't betray any emotion. "Is everything all right, sir?" the worker asked with a blank stare. Carl swallowed hard, his heart pounding. He glanced around the room. The place seemed normal now, but the feeling of dread hadn't left. "Yeah," Carl said, his voice hoarse. Just fine." He left the restaurant, his hands trembling as he got into his car. As he drove away, he glanced into the rearview mirror. In the reflection, just for a split second, he saw the faint outline of the man in the black suit standing in the window, watching him go. Carl never stopped at Tasty Burgers again. But the weirdest part of it all? When he went home and checked his phone, he noticed something on the screen. A message from an unknown number. It was a picture of him, sitting in that booth, with the man in the black suit standing behind him. The timestamp was from the moment he had been sitting there, but Carl had no memory of taking that photo.
Story number 3.
In the sleepy town of Glenwood, there was a small, almost forgotten Burger King that sat at the edge of a desolate stretch of road. The locals didn't talk much about it anymore. It had been open for years, yet nobody ever seemed to go there. Its drive-through was eerily quiet, the parking lot always empty. No one could quite figure out why. The food was fine, the service was normal, but something about the place was unsettling. Jason, a truck driver who frequented the road late at night, had heard the whispers. He'd always dismissed them. Ghost stories, urban legends, the usual chatter you'd hear from bored people. But one night, tired from a long haul, he decided to stop by and grab something to eat. It was around 2:30 a.m., and he was craving a quick bite before he continued on his journey. The parking lot was empty, just like always. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting long, flickering shadows across the cracked pavement. Jason pulled into the drive-thru and rolled down his window, expecting the usual bored employee to greet him. But there was no one at the speaker. He waited for a moment, then pressed the button. "Hello?" he called out. A crackling static filled the air, followed by a faint, distorted voice. "Order when ready," it said. Jason hesitated, but then shrugged and placed his order. A Whopper meal, large fries, and a soda. The voice on the other end gave no response. The screen didn't flash or show any indication of what he had ordered, but he assumed it was being processed anyway. A few minutes passed. Still, no sign of anyone in the window, no sound of movement inside the building. Jason grew impatient. He pulled his truck up to the window, expecting the usual exchange. But when he rolled down his window, something was wrong. There was no one behind the counter, no one in the kitchen. The place was empty. A sense of unease crept up Jason's spine as he looked around, unsure of what to do. He started to drive away but stopped when he saw something strange. The door to the dining area was slightly ajar. From the dim light inside, he could see a flicker of movement. Curiosity got the better of him. He parked his truck and stepped out, his boots thudding softly against the cracked pavement. As he approached the door, he could hear soft rustling inside. Not the sounds of a busy kitchen, but something else, like whispering. He pushed the door open, and a wave of cold air rushed past him. Inside, the lights were off, except for a single flickering bulb over the far corner. The air smelled stale, like old grease, and something sweeter, something nauseating. Jason hesitated. He felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up, but his stomach growled. The hunger, the need for something warm, something familiar, pushed him forward. As he walked deeper into the restaurant, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. All of the tables were occupied. Not by people, though. They were all filled with empty Burger King crowns, stacked neatly in the center of each booth as if placed there intentionally. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. The crowns were covered in blood, dried and crusted, the red stained the paper, and the smell, the sickly sweet smell of it hit Jason like a punch in the gut. His pulse quickened. Something was very wrong. "Hello?" Jason called out, his voice shaking slightly. No response. He turned to leave, but froze when he saw something in the corner of his eye. A figure, standing by the back door, bathed in shadow. The person was tall, gaunt, and dressed in an old, faded Burger King uniform. Their face was obscured by a paper crown, but Jason could still see the faint outline of their eyes, wide and unblinking, staring directly at him. Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't move, couldn't look away. The figure took a step forward, and then another. The whispering grew louder, a soft, unintelligible hum filling the air. The figure was walking toward him now, slowly, methodically, its head tilted to the side like it was studying him. In a cold, raspy voice, the figure spoke. "You should not have come." Jason bolted for the door, his legs almost giving out beneath him. He didn't look back. He didn't stop running until he reached his truck, slamming the door behind him and locking it as quickly as he could. His hands trembled as he started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, his eyes glued to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure chasing him. But there was nothing. The Burger King sat still, dark and empty behind him. Jason didn't stop for food again that night, and when he passed through Glenwood a few weeks later, the Burger King was gone, the building reduced to rubble, as if it had never existed. It wasn't until months later that Jason heard the truth. The locals whispered that the place had been built on cursed ground, and every few years the Burger King would reopen, only to disappear again, taking with it the souls of those who ventured inside after midnight. No one knew exactly who or what was behind the haunting, but everyone who'd been inside after dark had the same story: the blood-stained crowns, the unblinking eyes, the cold, empty silence that followed them. Jason never went near that stretch of road again, and he never told anyone what happened. But when he passed the site of the old Burger King years later, he couldn't shake the feeling that somehow it was still there, waiting.
Story number 4.
On the outskirts of a small, unremarkable town sat a quiet Burger King that, despite its prime location near the highway, never seemed to attract much attention. Most of the locals preferred the diner down the street, and the truckers who passed through didn't stop as often as they used to. The lights were always on, the sign always illuminated, but something about the place felt off. Some of the older residents would whisper about the history of the building, though few would ever elaborate in full. One such whisper was about a man named Terry, who worked the overnight shift at this particular Burger King for the better part of a year. Terry wasn't much of a talker, and he didn't mind working alone during the night shift. There was something about the peace and quiet that appealed to him. The drive-thru was rarely used after 2 a.m., and the lobby was always empty, so he could just focus on keeping the place clean. But it wasn't long before he started to notice strange things. It began with the freezer. Every time Terry would go to take something out, he'd hear a soft thumping noise from inside, like something was tapping on the walls. He told himself it was just the freezer defrosting or the vibrations of the old machine. But over time, the thumping started to get louder. It would come at random intervals, even when the freezer was empty. He dismissed it, convinced it was just the building settling. Then came the voices. At first, it was soft, a faint murmur that could have been mistaken for the hum of the machines in the back. But after a few weeks, it became clearer. Low whispers, almost like a conversation, but no one else was in the building. Terry would stop what he was doing, straining his ears to catch any words, but all he could hear was the static of distant chatter, muffled and indecipherable. One night, Terry decided to investigate. He turned off the lights in the dining area, hoping the shadows would reveal whatever was causing the strange noises. He walked through the restaurant, glancing into every corner, but everything appeared to be normal. No one was in the kitchen. No one was in the bathrooms, just the eerie silence of an empty building. As he passed the counter, he felt a cold draft against his skin. He turned to see a figure standing in the corner of the lobby. A man dressed in a tattered Burger King uniform with dark, sunken eyes and an expressionless face. He was just standing there, his gaze fixed on the floor. Terry froze. For a moment, he thought it was just another late-night customer, but something about the figure felt wrong, like it didn't belong there. The air around the man was thick with an unnatural chill, and the faint smell of burnt meat hung heavily in the air, despite the fact that the grill had been off for hours. "Can I help you?" Terry asked, his voice shaking. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless, his gaze still fixed on the ground. Terry stepped forward, trying to approach, but something in his gut told him not to get any closer. The figure was wrong. Something about the way it stood, the way it didn't move, made Terry feel like it was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. Then, without warning, the figure looked up. Its eyes were completely black. No whites, no pupils, just deep, endless voids. Terry staggered back, heart pounding in his chest. The man's lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, there was only a sound, like a low, drawn-out whisper. A sound so distant, so guttural, that it seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the restaurant. Terry turned to run, but the figure was suddenly standing directly in front of him, blocking the exit. Its face twisted into something grotesque, its mouth stretching unnaturally wide. And then, as if on cue, the whispers grew louder, turning into a cacophony of voices. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all speaking at once. Terry's legs buckled beneath him, and he collapsed to the floor, his body shaking uncontrollably. The voices grew louder, the figure moving closer, until Terry felt his mind begin to unravel. The last thing he remembered before everything went black was the sound of someone laughing. A deep, cruel laugh that echoed in his ears, reverberating throughout the entire restaurant. When he woke up, the restaurant was empty. The man in the tattered uniform was gone, the whispers were silent, and the freezer was closed. The clock on the wall showed it was 4:30 a.m. Hours had passed, but Terry couldn't remember a single moment after the figure appeared. He tried to shake it off, convinced it was just a hallucination, a product of exhaustion. But the next night, when he came back to work, it happened again. The whispers, the cold air, the figure standing in the corner, waiting. And this time, it was closer. Terry didn't last much longer after that. He quit the job a few weeks later, telling his supervisor that he couldn't handle it anymore. He never spoke of the man in the uniform or the whispers, but everyone who worked there after him seemed to experience the same things. The figure appeared again, on different nights, always at the same time, 3:15 a.m. And the weirdest part? No one ever remembered seeing the figure leave. To this day, the Burger King still stands on the outskirts of town, but it's rarely open past midnight. Those who still work there refuse to stay after hours, and locals avoid driving by it at night. The whispers, they say, never stopped. And sometimes, if you look closely enough, you can still see the figure standing in the corner of the restaurant, waiting for someone to make a mistake.
Story number 5.
There was a small town in Maine, nestled near the coastline, where the only fast food option was a secluded Burger King at the end of a long, winding road. The building was old, weathered by years of coastal storms, and had an eerie stillness about it that discouraged most from visiting. The locals avoided it. Tourists never knew it was even there. But despite this, the Burger King never closed. It remained open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Jack, a traveling salesman, had stayed in the town for a night after his business trip, and his hunger drove him toward the strange Burger King. It was almost 1:30 a.m. when he arrived, and the place looked like it had been abandoned for years. The windows were cracked, the neon lights flickered in a dull, sickly glow, and the air felt thick with moisture and age. But his stomach urged him on. After a long day of work and driving, he was craving something familiar. As he pulled into the parking lot, he noticed that the lot was completely empty. The wind swept through the place, causing a few old plastic chairs to scrape across the pavement. Jack didn't think much of it. He parked and stepped out, hearing the soft crunch of gravel beneath his boots. The door to the restaurant was already ajar, which struck him as odd, but he assumed someone had simply left it open for ventilation. He entered and was immediately greeted by a strange silence. There was no sound from the kitchen, no music playing overhead, no customers chatting. It was unnervingly quiet. Even the faint hum of the fridge was absent. He approached the counter, but there was no one there. The lights above flickered intermittently, casting long shadows across the greasy countertops. The restaurant appeared completely untouched, as if no one had set foot inside for weeks. "Hello?" Jack called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. Silence. He waited, still unsure of whether he should leave or continue waiting for someone to appear. As he stood there, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the quiet, it was the stillness of the place. There was an unnatural coldness in the air, even though it was a warm night outside. Just as he was about to leave, he heard the faintest sound, a soft scraping noise, like a metal tray being dragged across the floor. He froze, his heart thumping in his chest. Slowly, the sound grew louder, closer. Something was moving toward him. Then, from the back of the restaurant, a figure emerged. It was a man, but his appearance was strange. His face was pale, almost translucent, with dark, hollow eyes that stared ahead, unblinking. He was wearing a Burger King uniform, but the fabric was tattered and torn, like it had been worn for years. He shuffled toward the counter, not speaking, his feet dragging across the floor. Excuse me, Jack stammered, stepping back. Are you okay? The man didn't respond. He just continued to shuffle forward, his expression blank, his eyes fixed on Jack, never looking away. Jack took another step back, his breath catching in his throat. He turned quickly to leave, but the door, the one that had been opened just moments ago, was now shut tight. His heart began to race as the man slowly approached, his ragged breathing now audible in the otherwise silent restaurant. Jack pounded on the door, but it didn't budge. The man was close now, his face almost emotionless, but there was something in his eyes, something that wasn't quite right. It was as if they were hungry, empty. Before Jack could react, the man stopped just inches away and without a word, placed a greasy paper crown on Jack's head. Jack recoiled in shock, his heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. The man's breath was cold, and there was an overpowering smell of burnt food and rot in the air. Eat, the man whispered, his voice a rasping, guttural sound. Jack couldn't speak. He couldn't move. His body was frozen with fear. The man slowly extended a tray to him, and upon it was a meal, a Whopper, but the meat looked wrong. It was unnaturally black, charred in a way that no burger should ever be. The lettuce wilted, and the bread was soggy and soaked through. With trembling hands, Jack took the tray from the man, but as soon as he touched it, a wave of nausea washed over him. He looked down at the burger, and that's when he noticed something even worse. The meat wasn't just black, it was moving. It seemed to twitch and undulate as though something beneath the surface was alive. Without thinking, Jack hurled the tray away from him. It crashed against the counter, spilling the contents onto the floor. The man didn't react. He simply turned and began to shuffle back to the kitchen. As Jack ran to the door again, he heard the scrape of a metal tray behind him, growing louder and louder. He threw his shoulder into the door, slamming it open with all his strength. As he stumbled outside, gasping for air, he looked back at the Burger King. The lights flickered one last time, and in that brief moment of darkness, Jack swore he saw something move inside, something large, something that wasn't quite human. A dark shape, hunched over, with countless hands stretching out toward him, like they were trying to grab him, pull him back inside. Jack didn't stop running until he was miles away. He never spoke to anyone about what happened that night, but he made sure to leave the town first thing in the morning. He couldn't shake the feeling that the Burger King still watched him, that it was waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler to come through. And to this day, no one knows what really happened inside that Burger King. But there are rumors of people who disappeared after stepping foot inside, of whispers about a strange meal that no one should ever eat, and of a man in a tattered uniform who still waits in the shadows, his eyes hungry for the next visitor to walk through the door.
Story number 6.
Late at night, when the streets of the city were empty and silent, there was one Burger King that seemed to draw in people who couldn't explain why they stopped. Located on a forgotten corner, away from the main drag, this Burger King had seen better days. The neon sign flickered weakly, and the windows were dusty, covered in grime. But for some strange reason, it remained open 24/7. A man named Dean, traveling through the city for work, had been awake for hours, his stomach growling. He didn't want anything fancy, just a quick meal to keep him going. The Burger King appeared in the distance, and despite the off-putting look of the place, he was too hungry to care. It was around 3 a.m. when he pulled into the nearly empty parking lot. He didn't think anything of the silence. It was late after all. The city was quiet at this hour, but as he approached the front door, he noticed that something was strange. There were no other cars in the parking lot, no one inside, yet the lights were on and the door was wide open. The interior was eerily quiet, no sound of fries sizzling or the hum of the soda machines, just silence. Dean glanced at the counter and to his surprise, a single employee was there. She was tall, with long dark hair that cascaded over her shoulders, but her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes were too wide, unnaturally large. "Can I help you?" she asked in a voice that seemed both too sweet and too hollow. Dean was unnerved, but he shrugged it off as fatigue. "Just a Whopper and fries, thanks." The woman didn't write anything down. Instead, she slowly turned to the grill and started assembling the meal without speaking. Her movements slow and deliberate. As Dean waited, he couldn't help but feel like something wasn't right. The air in the restaurant was thick, stifling, and the temperature had dropped dramatically. He watched the woman as she prepared the burger. Her hands were unnervingly steady, and yet, when she placed the sandwich in front of him, he noticed something odd. The meat, which was supposed to be fresh, was dark. Not browned, but black, like it had been burnt to the point of being unrecognizable. The fries were limp, soggy, and pale. Dean didn't know what to say, but he took the tray. As he picked it up, the woman smiled at him. It wasn't a warm smile. It was wide, almost too wide, and her teeth were sharp, unnaturally so, like the teeth of an animal. "Enjoy," she said, her voice colder than before. Dean moved to a booth in the corner and began to eat, his stomach still growling. But something about the food unsettled him. The meat tasted off, almost rancid, but his hunger pushed him to keep eating. He tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut, the way the air seemed to grow colder with every bite. Then, just as he swallowed the last of the burger, the lights flickered. A loud hum filled the air, like the sound of electricity crackling. Dean looked up, and for a moment, he thought he saw movement out of the corner of his eye, figures in the shadows, barely visible. He squinted, but they were gone. A sudden crash echoed from the kitchen, followed by a loud, unsettling scream. A scream that seemed to last too long, as if it were coming from somewhere deep underground. Dean jumped from his seat, panic creeping up his spine. He rushed to the counter, but the woman was gone. The kitchen was dark, and the back door stood ajar, swaying gently in the wind. Without thinking, Dean grabbed his coat and ran out of the restaurant. But when he reached his car, he stopped cold. The parking lot, which had been empty when he first arrived, was now filled with dozens of cars. Their headlights were all off, but their engines were running. The eerie glow of the car lights illuminated the lot in a way that made everything look distorted. And there, standing at the center of it all, was the woman. But now, she wasn't alone. The figures he had seen in the shadows earlier were standing beside her. They were dressed in Burger King uniforms, their faces twisted into grotesque empty smiles. Their eyes were hollow, black like empty voids, and they all stared at Dean. "Stay with us," the woman called out to him, her voice like a chant, repeating the words over and over. He stumbled backward, heart racing, his mind screaming at him to run, but he couldn't look away. The figures began to step toward him, moving in sync, their hands stretching out as if they were reaching for him. Dean snapped out of his trance, and with all the strength he could muster, he turned and sprinted to his car. His breath was coming in short, sharp gasps as he slammed the door shut, his hands trembling as he fumbled for the keys. His car roared to life, and without a second thought, he sped out of the parking lot, not daring to look back. As he drove away, the image of the restaurant stayed burned into his mind. He glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something chasing him. But there was nothing. The next morning, Dean went back to that street to find the Burger King, but when he reached the spot where it had been, there was nothing. The building was gone. The parking lot was empty, with only a patch of overgrown grass remaining where the restaurant once stood. Years later, Dean would still have nightmares of the figures in the parking lot, and sometimes when passing by an old Burger King in a new city, he would catch a glimpse of that same woman watching him from the window. But every time he tried to stop, he found the place locked up tight, empty, as though it had never been open at all. He never ate fast food again.
Story number 7.
There was a small town in the Midwest where most people lived simple, quiet lives. But there was one thing that always unsettled the town's residents, the Burger King on the outskirts. It wasn't that it was particularly old or run down. In fact, it looked almost new compared to other fast food joints in the area. It was the fact that it was always open, even when no one was ever there. And that's exactly how it had been for years. Sam, a young man in his early 20s, had recently moved to the town. He was just getting settled in, trying to find his place in the new surroundings, when he decided to stop by the Burger King one late evening. He had heard rumors, the kind that circulate in small towns, about the place being haunted, but Sam never believed in that kind of thing. He was just hungry and curious. He drove down the lonely road that led to the Burger King, and as he pulled into the parking lot, He immediately noticed that there were no cars, not a single soul around. Still, the sign was lit up, the restaurant was glowing brightly against the darkening sky, and the doors were wide open. Sam shrugged. Maybe they just don't get much business at night, he muttered to himself, stepping out of the car and walking toward the entrance. The bell above the door chimed as he pushed it open, and he was met with an eerie silence. The restaurant was empty, aside from a single employee behind the counter. She was young, maybe in her mid-20s, with pale skin and dark circles under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept in days. Her uniform was neat, but something about her expression made Sam uncomfortable. She didn't smile, didn't say anything as he approached the counter. Her gaze was fixed on him, but there was something off about her eyes. They looked too wide, almost as if she were forcing them open. Sam cleared his throat. "Hey, I'll just have a Whopper and fries." Without a word, the woman turned to prepare his order. Sam watched her as she moved in a slow, methodical manner, her fingers moving mechanically as she put together the meal. There was no music playing, no sound except for the faint hum of the refrigerators in the back. The silence was oppressive, almost suffocating. Sam started to feel like he was the only person left in the world. He tried to ignore the growing discomfort in his chest and stared out the window, hoping the cold night air would help him shake the odd feeling. But as he glanced outside, he noticed something strange. There were no stars. The sky was pitch black, with not even a hint of moonlight. "Your food's ready," the woman said suddenly, her voice low and hollow. Sam jumped slightly, his heart pounding. He hadn't even noticed her finish making the food. She placed the tray in front of him, her eyes still locked on his. But now there was something different in her gaze, a sense of emptiness, as though there was no one behind her eyes at all. Sam didn't know what made him stay, but he picked up the tray and moved to a nearby booth. As he sat down, he unwrapped the Whopper and took a bite. The moment the food touched his lips, a strange metallic taste hit his tongue. It was as if the burger itself was wrong. He couldn't describe it. It didn't taste like food. It tasted like something else entirely. He pushed the tray away, his stomach turning. That's when he heard it. A soft scratching sound, almost imperceptible, like something was dragging across the floor. Sam glanced around but saw nothing. The scratching grew louder, and now he could hear it coming from beneath the table. Suddenly, the lights flickered. For a brief moment, everything went completely dark. When they came back on, the restaurant was no longer the same. The walls, which had been a dull beige, were now streaked with dark, sticky stains. The air smelled foul, like something was rotting. The floors were covered in a strange, thick black substance that seemed to move and shift on its own. The sound of the scratching was louder now, unmistakable, coming from beneath the booth, as if something was underneath the restaurant, crawling closer to him. Panic surged through Sam. He stood up, his heart racing, and turned toward the counter. The woman was no longer there. In her place, standing in the middle of the floor, was a figure, tall, impossibly tall, with long, spindly limbs and a face that was completely featureless. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a smooth, featureless surface. The figure was moving toward him, slow but deliberate. Sam backed up, his legs shaking, his mind screaming for him to run. But before he could move, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The figure reached out with one long, bony hand and touched Sam's shoulder. He froze, feeling an icy coldness seep through his skin, spreading into his bones. "You're not supposed to leave," the figure whispered in a voice that was barely audible, but somehow Sam could hear it clearly in his mind. "We all stay, forever." Sam tried to scream, but no sound came out. His body refused to move. He could feel the presence of something else in the room, something just beyond the edges of his vision, watching him, waiting. The next morning, the town awoke to find the Burger King had vanished. Not a trace of it remained. No signs of destruction, no wreckage, just an empty lot where it once stood. Sam was never seen again. People in town talk about the Burger King now, though they never speak of it for too long. They say that sometimes, if you pass by the empty lot at night, you can hear the faint sound of scratching from beneath the ground, like something is still trying to get out. And if you're unlucky, you might hear a voice calling out to you, whispering from the dark, "Shah, we all stay, forever."